They don't hate the person you were. They hate the person you're becoming. Because when you were quiet, when you were small, when you doubted yourself, when you needed permission to breathe, they were comfortable with you. You fit the script, you played the role. You stayed in the psychological cage they unknowingly built for you. But the moment you started to change, truly change, something shifted, not in you, in them. You stopped apologizing for your light. You stopped shrinking your truth. You stopped asking for approval to exist. And suddenly, the smiles became tight. The support became selective. The admiration quietly turned into irritation, not because you did something wrong, but because your growth forced them to face everything they avoided becoming. Most people don't hate your success. They hate the mirror it becomes. Your courage reflects their fear. Your discipline exposes their excuses. Your healing reminds them of the wounds they refuse to touch. Your growth disturbs the unresolved in others because it forces a confrontation they have spent their entire lives avoiding. When you rise, when you heal, when you gain clarity, you do not simply change your own life. You disrupt invisible emotional structures built on denial, fear, and stagnation. Your evolution becomes a mirror, and not everyone is prepared to look into it. Most people are not uncomfortable with your success itself. They are uncomfortable with what your success reminds them of. Their hesitation, their delays, the years they spent waiting for permission, the dreams they silenced to survive. When you choose courage, you expose where they chose comfort. When you choose discipline, you expose where they chose escape. When you choose growth, you expose where they chose safety over truth. And exposure creates psychological pressure. Unresolved people carry heavy emotional debts inside them: regret, shame, unspoken anger, buried desires. They learn to survive by building identities around avoidance. They tell themselves they are content. They convince themselves that this is just how life is. They create stories that allow them to sleep at night without facing the cost of their own postponement. And then you come along and begin to change, not loudly, not aggressively, just steadily. And that steady transformation becomes unbearable, because your growth doesn't argue with their excuses. It invalidates them. You don't need to say a single word for your progress to feel like an accusation. Your discipline feels like judgment. Your confidence feels like arrogance. Your boundaries feel like betrayal. Not because you are attacking them, but because your existence contradicts the narrative they built to stay small without guilt. This is why unresolved people often react with subtle hostility rather than open confrontation. The passive comments, the backhanded compliments, the sudden emotional distance, the shift in tone when you speak about your future, the way they minimize your wins, the way they suddenly worry about you when you rise instead of when you struggle. What they are really saying is, if you keep growing, I'll have to admit that I chose not to. So instead of facing themselves, they resist you. Your growth shatters unspoken agreements. There was an invisible contract that said you would remain familiar, predictable, manageable. You would stay in the same emotional range that made everyone feel safe by comparison. When you break that pattern, you don't just change your trajectory, you destabilize the emotional hierarchy of every relationship around you. People who built their identity on being wiser than you feel threatened when you outgrow their advice. People who built their power on your dependency feel lost when you become self directed. People who built their confidence on your insecurity feel exposed when you stop doubting yourself, so they reinterpret your evolution as betrayal. They don't say, "You're growing." They say, "You've changed," as if change were a crime, as if becoming stronger were a personal attack. But the truth is deeper and more uncomfortable. Unresolved people don't hate your light. They fear what it reveals. Your clarity reveals their confusion. Your stability reveals their chaos. Your self-trust reveals their inner fragmentation. And rather than integrate what they see, they defend against it. This is the nature of psychological resistance. Growth activates dormant conflicts in others. It wakes up emotions they worked hard to numb. It resurrects questions they buried under routine. It reminds them of the life they once imagined before fear rewrote their identity. And when a person is not ready to face that internal war, they project it outward. You become the threat because you became the reminder. And the more quietly confident your growth becomes, the louder their inner discomfort grows. That is why the most resistance often comes not at the beginning of your transformation, but after you have sustained it. When your discipline is no longer new, when your confidence is no longer fragile, when your boundaries no longer shake, when your self-respect no longer negotiates, your consistency removes hope that this is just a phase. And that is when the unresolved feel trapped, because now they can no longer comfort themselves with the idea that you will eventually return to the version of you that made them feel superior, safer, or needed. Now they must either rise with you or remain where they are, and remaining where they are suddenly feels like suffocation. So they attempt to pull you back emotionally, through guilt, through doubt, through nostalgia, through criticism disguised as concern, not because they want to hurt you, but because your growth has made their stagnation impossible to ignore. Your evolution forces a decision in everyone who witnesses it. They must either confront their inner world or harden themselves against it. Some will grow alongside you, and others will retreat into defense. And the ones who retreat will often become the loudest critics. This is why growth feels lonely. Not because you are wrong, but because you are early, not because you are arrogant, but because you are integrated, not because you abandoned others, but because you finally chose yourself. The unresolved will always feel disturbed by those who resolve themselves. The healing will always feel offensive to those who survive through wounds. The disciplined will always feel threatening to those who live through indulgence. And the free will always look dangerous to those still negotiating with fear. Your growth was never meant to be comfortable for everyone around you. It was meant to be honest. It was meant to be exact. It was meant to be costly. And the emotional price is often paid not in failure, but in misunderstanding, distance, and subtle opposition from those who can no longer recognize you as the version of you that kept their inner world undisturbed. Human beings are often far more complex than they appear on the surface. One of the most invisible and dangerous psychological dynamics is projection. The unconscious act of attributing one's own fears, desires, and unresolved conflicts onto others. It is a mechanism that shields the ego from discomfort, but it also distorts relationships. Projection is the reason admiration can easily transform into resentment, and it is the invisible force that dictates much of how people respond to growth in others. When someone sees qualities in you that they secretly long for or fear, Their response is rarely neutral. At first, they may admire you. They may praise your courage, discipline, clarity, or authenticity. They may feel inspired by the way you live your life, as if your actions confirm the possibilities they have always hoped existed. This admiration, however, is fragile because it is rooted not in pure appreciation, but in an unconscious comparison. They are measuring themselves against you, and in that reflection, they see a truth they would rather avoid. Projection flips admiration into resentment because it forces an internal confrontation. When people witness someone embody traits they themselves desire but have suppressed, a tension arises. Their admiration carries an implicit accusation. Why have I not become like this? Why have I settled? Why have I denied myself in ways that they did not? These unspoken questions are uncomfortable, often unbearable, because they strike directly at the ego's need for justification. To resolve this discomfort, the mind seeks a way to redirect the tension outward. And that is where resentment takes root. The qualities they once admired in you are now perceived as a threat. Your confidence feels like arrogance. Your success feels like a judgment. Your happiness feels like provocation. They project their inner conflicts onto your behavior, interpreting your authenticity as criticism, your strength as defiance, and your growth as a challenge to their self-image. What began as admiration becomes a distorted mirror, a reflection of their unresolved fears and insecurities. Projection is not conscious. Most people are unaware that their resentment is born from themselves rather than from your actions. They are convinced that your success or clarity is the problem, when in reality, it is the illumination of their own shadows that they cannot endure. This is why some people respond to brilliance with hostility, to resilience with ridicule, and to self-determination with passive-aggressive tactics. They cannot tolerate what they secretly wish they could embody. The transition from admiration to resentment often follows a predictable psychological pattern. First comes fascination. They notice your talent, vision, or integrity and feel drawn to it. Then comes envy, the awareness that you possess something they lack or have denied themselves. Finally comes projection. Their admiration turns into criticism, their respect into judgment, their desire into resentment. Each stage is propelled not by your behavior, but by the unresolved elements within them. Projection can also manifest in subtler ways. It may appear as unsolicited advice, as if they know the better path for you. It may emerge as exaggeration of your mistakes, twisting minor flaws into symbols of failure. It may become withdrawal, distancing themselves from your presence, because the proximity of your growth makes them uncomfortable. Every interaction is filtered through the lens of their unacknowledged desires, fears, or insecurities. The fascinating and often painful reality is that this process says nothing about you. It is entirely about them. Your authenticity does not require explanation. Your courage does not require validation. Your growth does not need their approval. Yet, because projection is unconscious, they will insist, often convincingly, that the problem lies with your choices rather than with their inability to confront themselves. This dynamic is particularly intense in relationships where emotional dependence exists. The more someone relies on you to maintain their sense of security, identity, or superiority, the more likely they are to project. Your independence threatens their stability, and so admiration is quickly converted into resentment. Their envy is disguised as concern, their critique as guidance, their distancing as protection, all mechanisms to preserve the self-image that your growth disrupts. Projection also explains why some of the most talented, authentic, and disciplined individuals are met with disproportionate resistance. The very qualities that attract admiration initially are the ones that provoke resentment when they illuminate unaddressed deficiencies in others. The more visible your alignment with your own truth, the more pronounced the psychological pressure becomes. Admiration cannot coexist with unresolved envy. One eventually overwhelms the other. Understanding this dynamic transforms how we interpret human behavior. When someone resents you without clear reason, it may not reflect your worth, but the projection of what they cannot reconcile within themselves. Their anger is not a mirror of your failure. It is a reflection of their unhealed shadows. And the most profound act of self-preservation is to recognize that their resentment is about them, not you, and to continue growing without internalizing their projections. Transformation breaks unspoken contracts because growth does not occur in isolation. Every relationship, every interaction, every bond we form carries implicit agreements, unspoken rules that govern behavior, expectations, and emotional dynamics. These contracts are often invisible, unarticulated, and unconscious, yet they shape the way people respond to us. When you evolve, when you embrace your truth, when you move beyond old patterns, these silent agreements are disrupted, and the consequences are often felt more intensely by those around you than by yourself. From childhood onward, humans are socialized to maintain harmony by adhering to subtle rules. Family, friends, colleagues, and communities all operate within frameworks of expectation. These frameworks are rarely explicit, but everyone knows the boundaries. You were expected to play certain roles: the obedient child, the agreeable friend, the dependable employee, the predictable partner. Within these roles, comfort is maintained. People are reassured by your stability, your predictability, your willingness to fit the narrative they have constructed for themselves and for you. Transformation challenges all of that. It requires breaking old habits, challenging internalized beliefs, and stepping into uncharted territories of thought, emotion, and action. When you transform, you no longer behave according to the patterns that others have unconsciously relied upon. The contracts that once kept relationships harmonious now feel violated, not because you have done anything inherently wrong, but because your evolution exposes what was always conditional about their attachment to you. Unspoken contracts are powerful because they are invisible. They do not need to be written, spoken, or consciously acknowledged to guide behavior. A family may expect that you will always defer to their authority. Friends may expect that you will always make yourself available. A partner may expect that you will continue to meet their unspoken emotional needs. These expectations are often enforced subtly through guilt, passive aggression, emotional withdrawal, or criticism. They are not overt threats, but psychological pressures that shape your choices and limit your freedom. When transformation occurs, these invisible rules are no longer obeyed. You may assert boundaries where none existed before, or you may prioritize your needs over others' expectations. You may make decisions that reflect your values rather than their comfort. And in doing so, you break the silent agreements that have kept everyone comfortable, even if that comfort was built on subtle control, dependence, or manipulation. People often resist this disruption because the contracts, though unspoken, provide security. They have a predictable pattern to cling to, a version of you they understand and can anticipate. When transformation breaks that predictability, it threatens the balance of their emotional ecosystem. They may respond with confusion, anger, or attempts to reassert the old rules. Their reactions are not necessarily a reflection of your transformation being wrong, but a sign of their attachment to the old version of you, a version that served their psychological needs, consciously or unconsciously. Unspoken contracts also extend to social perception. Society itself rewards conformity, punishes deviation, and often unconsciously enforces stability. By stepping into transformation, you step outside the expected patterns of behavior. Your choices may no longer align with what is socially sanctioned or familiar. People who are invested in the social norms you once followed may perceive your change as betrayal, even though it is a necessary evolution of self. The subtle tragedy of unspoken contracts is that they rarely end with explicit confrontation. There is often no conversation, no declaration, no official acknowledgement of broken agreements. Instead, tension builds silently. Relationships may become strained, support may dwindle, people who once seemed loyal may grow distant. Criticism may become sharper, nostalgia may be weaponized, and reminders of the old you may be deployed as a subtle attempt to enforce compliance. Transformation does not seek to punish or alienate. It seeks to align the individual with their authentic self. Yet the breaking of unspoken contracts is inevitable because alignment with truth cannot coexist with adherence to agreements built on limitation, denial, or expectation. Growth inherently challenges the status quo, disrupts familiar patterns, and forces a recalibration of relationships and social dynamics. Even those who love you most may struggle with this process. Love often thrives on predictability, familiarity, and stability. When transformation interrupts the flow of expectation, even well-meaning individuals may react defensively. Their discomfort is not necessarily rejection of you, but an unwillingness to confront the instability your growth introduces into their psychological world. This dynamic reveals the subtle but profound cost of transformation. It is not always material, and it is not always dramatic, but it is deeply felt in the emotional and relational fabric of life. Every step towards self-realization carries the potential to disrupt the delicate, invisible agreements that hold relationships in equilibrium, exposing both the fragility of attachment and the necessity of evolution. Power awakens hidden enemies because it threatens the unseen structures that others rely upon for control, validation, or self-preservation. True power, the kind that arises from clarity, self-discipline, and authenticity, does not merely change the external circumstances of your life. It changes the way you exist in the world, the way you interact with others, and the way people perceive you. And when you step into that kind of power, you do more than assert yourself. You illuminate the cracks in the walls of those who have built their security on your compliance. The first reaction of hidden enemies is often subtle. At the beginning, there may be admiration or at least polite acceptance. People may smile, nod, or even celebrate your initial successes. They may encourage your growth as long as it does not challenge the familiar patterns of influence and expectation. But power is not a static quality. It accumulates quietly through choices, through self-mastery, and through the unwavering refusal to compromise on truth. And as it grows, it begins to change the way you move through relationships, institutions, and social networks. It is in this expansion that hidden enemies awaken. These are not always obvious adversaries. Often, they are the people who once appeared supportive, even loving. They are friends, colleagues, mentors, or family members whose sense of stability depended on the version of you that was small, pliable, or manageable. When you begin to assert boundaries, speak your truth, or claim space that was previously denied, the quiet contentment of their environment is disrupted. Your power becomes a mirror reflecting their weaknesses, insecurities, or unfulfilled potential. Hidden enemies do not emerge because they dislike you inherently. They emerge because your presence exposes what they fear most, their own limitations. They may have relied on your dependence to feel competent. They may have benefited from your compliance or restraint. They may have constructed identities that positioned them above you, only to find that your rising challenges that hierarchy. And when the foundations of their perceived superiority tremble, they often respond not with reflection, but with resistance. This resistance can take many forms. It can appear as criticism disguised as advice, subtle undermining, gossip, or strategic obstruction. It can manifest in passive, aggressive behavior, hidden sabotage, or attempts to manipulate your choices. The key feature of hidden enemies is that their hostility is rarely direct. At first, it is covert, psychological, and often rationalized as concern or caution. They cannot openly oppose the force of your power without exposing their own vulnerabilities, so they work from the shadows, influencing perception, sowing doubt, and attempting to sway others against you. Power awakens hidden enemies precisely because it is a threat to unconscious hierarchies. People rely on the predictability of relationships to maintain their sense of control, identity, and emotional safety. When someone refuses to fit into those predictable patterns, it triggers anxiety and fear. The hidden enemy emerges as a guardian of the status quo, defending the old order that served their psychological needs. Your transformation, authority, or confidence acts as a lightning rod, drawing out resistance that had been dormant, invisible, or cleverly disguised. Interestingly, hidden enemies often confuse their own motivations. They may claim their actions are protective, rational, or justified. They may insist that your power is excessive or dangerous. They may project onto you their fears, insecurities, and unhealed wounds, interpreting your competence as arrogance, your independence as rebellion, or your integrity as threat. Their hostility is never truly about you. It is about the confrontation with aspects of themselves that your power awakens. The shame, fear, and unacknowledged potential that they have avoided facing. Power also awakens hidden enemies because it disrupts dependency. The more self-sufficient, disciplined, and authentic you become, the less others can manipulate you. Their leverage diminishes, their control slips, and when influence is lost, resentment arises. What was once a relationship built on mutual comfort can quickly transform into a battlefield where hidden agendas, veiled hostility, and subtle aggression surface. Those who once smiled with you in quiet solidarity now frown, question, or attempt to undermine the very qualities that empower you. It is essential to understand that hidden enemies are not always consciously aware of their actions. Many operate unconsciously, acting from patterns of fear, envy, or unresolved internal conflict. Your power simply acts as a catalyst, revealing the latent hostility that previously went unnoticed. The awakening of hidden enemies is less a reflection of your misstep and more an inevitable consequence of standing fully in your own strength, refusing to compromise, and embracing the totality of your potential. Power illuminates truth, not only your own, but the hidden dynamics of the world around you. The presence of hidden enemies is proof that your rise has disrupted equilibrium. It is proof that your influence, clarity, and agency are meaningful enough to challenge established patterns. And while the reactions of others may feel painful or confusing, they also provide insight. Who is aligned with your growth, who is constrained by their fears, and who is unwilling to confront the shadows your presence exposes. Becoming yourself is an act of psychological rebellion because it defies the subtle expectations, norms, and pressures that society, family, and even your own mind place upon you. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to adapt, conform, and obey invisible scripts designed to maintain stability, hierarchy, and predictability. Every smile, every apology, every compromise teaches us to survive within the boundaries of others' expectations. To become yourself is to step outside these boundaries, to challenge the patterns that have kept you small, quiet, and malleable, and to embrace the raw, often uncomfortable truth of your own being. Psychological rebellion begins internally. It is the refusal to surrender your inner voice to external authority. It is the refusal to shape your desires, values, and decisions according to what others deem acceptable or convenient. This rebellion is not loud or violent. It does not always manifest in confrontation or dramatic gestures. Often it is quite subtle and deeply personal, choosing integrity over approval, self-awareness over ignorance, freedom over comfort, and authenticity over performance. In a world that rewards imitation and punishes difference, even these choices are radical. The act of becoming yourself inherently challenges others. People are accustomed to a version of you that fits their understanding, satisfies their emotional needs, or reinforces their sense of stability. When you begin to assert your truth, you disrupt this equilibrium. Boundaries you establish feel like rebellion. Opinions you express feel like defiance. Choices you make for your own growth feel like violations of unspoken agreements. And those who have unconsciously relied on your predictability may respond with resistance, criticism, or subtle attempts to pull you back into conformity. Rebellion in this sense is deeply psychological because it operates in the realm of consciousness, identity, and perception. It is not merely about rejecting external rules. It is about rejecting the internalized rules that have dictated your sense of self. Every expectation you have absorbed from parents, teachers, peers, and society at large has shaped the version of you that was acceptable, tolerable, or safe. To rebel psychologically is to question these assumptions, to dismantle the narratives that limited your potential, and to reclaim authority over your own mind. This process is often met with fear, both internally and externally. Internally, rebellion threatens familiar patterns of thought, habitual ways of relating, and the comfort of predictability. There is a profound anxiety in dismantling long-held beliefs about who you should be. Externally, rebellion threatens those who have invested in your compliance. They may feel betrayed, confused, or threatened by your refusal to fit the mold. The more radical your self-realization, the more it forces others to confront the limitations, compromises, and illusions in their own lives. The rebellious act of becoming yourself is also an act of liberation. It frees you from the unconscious chains of expectation, obligation, and fear. It allows you to see yourself without the filters imposed by others' desires. It allows you to pursue passions, set boundaries, and express emotions that were previously denied. This freedom is intoxicating to the self, but it can be threatening to the collective. Those who have relied on your restraint may attempt to shame, guilt, or manipulate you back into compliance. Yet every act of self-assertion, no matter how small, strengthens your autonomy and exposes the dependency others have on your conformity. Psychological rebellion often manifests in alignment with personal truth rather than in conflict with others. It is the courage to honor your instincts, intuition, and values, even when doing so provokes discomfort in the social environment. It is the choice to live authentically rather than to perform for approval. And paradoxically, it is the very authenticity that awakens others to their own complacency, fear, or unrealized potential. Those who witness your rebellion may react with admiration, envy, or hostility, sometimes all at once, because it forces a reckoning they have avoided. The act of becoming yourself requires a persistent and conscious effort. It demands reflection, self-awareness, and an unflinching willingness to confront shadow aspects of the psyche. To rebel psychologically is to acknowledge the parts of yourself that have been suppressed, ignored, or denied, and to integrate them into conscious awareness. It is to recognize that conformity is often the easier path, but not the path toward fulfillment. The rebellion is not against people, rules, or society in a simplistic sense. It is against the internalized structures that have prevented the emergence of your authentic self. Every step toward authenticity is a declaration of independence. Every choice to honor your values, embrace your instincts, or speak your truth is a refusal to exist according to another's design. This rebellion is inevitably disruptive. It may strain relationships, challenge social norms, or provoke criticism, but it is precisely this disruption that signals psychological growth, the reclaiming of agency, and the refusal to surrender your identity to external forces